everyone, and welcome to Talk of the Towns. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Karen Bukes, and I'm the host tonight. I'm going to tell you, you should see the studio. We have brand new lighting. Dan the Magic Man, it's his concept, and it has made our life so much easier. It is wonderful. We have wonderful lights. Cut our time in half. We don't have to be at the studio so early. Thank you, Dan at PAC TV, for all your help, and the staff has been wonderful. Right now I have a public announcement. As you know, Selectman Matt Moratori is a candidate for state representative. Matt will be holding a kickoff event on Thursday, May 8th. The event will be held at the Plymouth Elks Lodge, 1476. The lodge is located at 52 Long Pond Road. Time is 5:30 to 7:30 p.m., and you know they always last longer. Please come and enjoy what promises to be a wonderful event. That's Thursday, May 8th at the Plymouth Elks Lodge, 1476. Ken and I will be there. Okay, let's welcome our underwriters. Jeff Cohen in One Stop Painting. Jeff, where is my wallpaper? Brewster PC Solutions with Wrestling Brewster. Watch wrestling with computers right here on PAC TV. Attorneys Trifletti and Costa on Long Pond Road. And another wonderful underwriter, David and Kevin Gallerani, owners of Cape Auto and Cape Service. Locations are Samoset and Sandwich Street, right here in Plymouth. Tonight's show is chock full of information. My two guest professions helps the world understand where certain species of birds migrate and their habits. From the Manomet Center for Conservation Sciences, we're so lucky to have them here. Please welcome Communications Director Dave McGlinchey and Trevor Lloyd-Evans. I love that name, Banding Director. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you for inviting us on Talk of the Town. This is exciting.
Well, I've told the center many, many times that they're welcome here whenever, and you make a yearly pilgrimage here, and I really appreciate it.
It's a great thing.
And you can come more than once a year, you know.
If you can understand the funny accent.
No, I do, and I love your accent. That's English, right?
Yes, it's a sort of a leftover English, Irish, Welsh mixture, but I've been here since 1972, so right now I'm Plymouth, I think.
Oh, yes, you are. A few years before Ken and I, we were 75, so you beat us.
I beat you. Well, that's something.
That's something. Now, we're going to be showing photos, too, in a little while of some beautiful birds and the wonderful adventures that Trevor has had. Now, I am going to start with you, Trevor. How long have you worked at the center?
I actually worked with birds in Britain and did my undergraduate degree there, and then came over here in 1972, and that was when our first director, Kathleen Anderson, started really sort of upgrading the work at the Manomet Bird Observatory, as it then was. A lot of people still call it that, and that's fine by us.
Yeah.
And it started as early as 1966. We became a non-profit in 1969, and so I've been here ever since 1972.
We've been blessed with you then, and it's a beautiful area. You know, Kenny and I will ride by, and it's just filled with nature. It's so beautiful. You're also a biologist.
I am. I got an undergraduate degree in biology from the University of Wales. Colleague Professor Abertawe, if you want to have a little bit of Welsh on the programme. I apologise to everybody. And ever since my parents took me out and showed me birds and showed me plants and sort of got me involved in that. I think it's just been something that has always been a hobby. So I'm one of these lucky people who have a hobby. I'm a bird watcher, and gosh, somebody pays me to do it and pays me to talk about it. That's wonderful.
It is wonderful, and I know everyone that works at the center loves their job. You're so lucky, because it's not a job. It's just a love of
it's fun.
what you're doing.
It's a special place to work.
A special place to work. And I say this all the time. I'm going to visit, but I don't. I always feel as though I'm going to bother somebody because I know that you're doing a lot of science and working with the children. They come.
They do.
You teach them.
We do.
And students and interns and volunteers. Tell us about that.
Well, before Trevor goes on, we do, and it's one of the things we're most proud of. We have about 1,000 visitors every banding season. And that, as Trevor has said, includes everything from elementary school students all the way up to colleges and photography clubs. So it's great to be able to share the research we do and the science with as many people as possible.
It is seasonal, and so we actually have our very fine mist nets, which is how we catch birds, out during the spring migration and the fall migration. So this is just the beginning of the season. If you come in the middle of winter, you'll see a lot of boring people sitting around in their offices, playing on their computers, I guess, like everybody else, and trying to raise funding for the next seasons and looking at our data and trying to write papers. But during the spring migration, so for us, this is 15th of April, so we are right today, despite the snow, through into the 15th of June. And the migrant birds then come up along the coast, obviously all the way from, in some cases, far away as South America, in some cases from not very far away. And the coast tends to be a natural corridor for migrating birds. So that's why our place right in Manomet, right on the coast, has a good representation of up to 90 different species of birds that we handle in the course of a spring.
Just perfect.
And that's a time to come see us in somewhat organized groups. So what we really ask is if anyone wants to come see, you're very welcome, but do call ahead.
Yes.
And during that spring migration period, we will be catching birds during weekdays, not on weekends, but during weekdays. And the same thing in the fall from mid-August through right up until mid-November, as all the migrant birds move south again and move back to their wintering areas.
Well, you know, there's a cranberry bog across the street from us where we live, and Tidmarsh Farms is turning that into back to nature.
Yes.
And it's been an uptick in the birds that we get.
Very much so.
And I do feed them.
Yes.
I feed the squirrels
So do
too,
I,
but
don't worry.
Tell anybody.
I feed squirrels also.
No.
Very hard not to feed squirrels when you come right down to it.
I know, but I just love the birds, and I'm sure it's going to get better and better as that goes back to nature. We even have a couple of cranes.
Passing by, sandhill cranes. I think I heard about that. Yes,
and
very exciting.
we have a brook in the back of the house, so they love that.
Yes.
And they'll be dredging out that brook pretty soon.
We work, we have had some generous grants from the AD Makepeace country, and the Makepeace bogs down in Wareham have also had a routine stopover for sandhill cranes in the fall, so I guess they're becoming more abundant. Right. We also have some cranberry bogs at Manomet. We literally bought the farm next door from our neighbor, Mr. Holmes, so we also have organic cranberry farms there, Dave, which again expands our habitat a little bit.
Right, yes, and we're restoring them right now. They're not yet productive, but we're restoring them right now in cooperation with a farmer from Plymouth, I believe.
From the local community.
Yes.
Yep, Jen.
Jen Friedrich, and she's doing a great job there and opening up the Manomet campus to a lot of the community and the neighbors, and we're excited about that.
Is that the one right on Point Road?
Right on Point Road.
Yes, and they have that little farm stand.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
so we have organic stuff there for sale, and people can buy shares and do things like that, and that's one way to get to Manomet.
Well, we have to, there's nothing like a garden. There really isn't.
Right.
But would you like to start the photos, and we can go back and forth?
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, please, Kenny, are they queued up? I hope they're in order.
So just before Trevor starts talking about the photos, as they're queued up, one of the things we've seen, and it's going to be reflected in the photos, is that a lot of the work we've been doing on the banding research, the data that's been collected over 45 years, has shown trends related to climate change. It's shown bird populations shifting, bird habitat shifting in response to climate change. It's not something that was intended when they started banding in 1969. They didn't know it was going to be climate change related data, but it has turned out to be. And so the birds we're going to show today Some of them are shifting in different ways in response to warming temperatures.
Do you find it cyclical, though? I mean, climate change, it's been going on since the Earth was born.
It has been. Climate change is certainly cyclical, but what we're seeing now is the pace of change is far beyond what's been happening for the last 100,000s of years.
So it's very difficult for natural populations of anything to adapt to rapidly changing climate.
I was watching a PBS station the other night, and they said, which makes sense, that a lot of the forest fires are affecting the northern hemisphere, the glaciers, and they're melting because of that. They lay on top all the ash, and it eats away at the ice. And I found that fascinating.
Right. Yes, we've done some work in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge through Manomet. Some of our colleagues, Stephen Brown and his cohorts, have been up there studying migrant shorebirds that migrate all the way up to the northern coast there. And it is a problem because if you have glistening white ice on the frozen sea in the north, then a lot of the heat is reflected right back up. But as you say, if there is a dark layer of soot, or as the ice melts and we now have dark water where there used to be ice, then you have the absorption of the sun's rays, and then you get a feedback mechanism where it heats up more rapidly. The interesting thing about climate change is, though, however, we can see it in our backyard. We can see it right here. And,
tell me about it.
Well, some of the birds that we can look at when we get around the pictures. But if you were here in the 1920s or 1930s, little too early for all of us. Let's say our grandparents, shall we, to be kind. Then you would not have seen any cardinals in your backyard.
Really?
That was a southern bird. And you would not have seen any tufted titmice, for those who know birds, the little grey fellows with the crest that come in and eat your sunflower seeds. So those species have been moving northwards under a climate change scenario. They're responding to the warmer climate by being able to spend their summers and winters, they're not particularly migratory, further and further north. So during just that rather brief period in terms of bird populations, cardinals are now everywhere. And some people probably in our audience will know red-bellied woodpeckers. This is a woodpecker. You have those with the black and white back and the red crest. You have everything.
Of the woodpecker, from little downies to the big one.
Right up to these guys. So the red bellies, again, was a southern bird until literally the last 20 years, 25 years, and they are now moving rapidly up into this part of the world, into New England.
I always thought the cardinal was a New England bird.
Was up to the point of, I mean, not since in all of the 1800s there were no cardinals here. And even
what
in
about
our
blue jays?
Blue jays have always been here. Blue jays are fine. Blue jays are fine. Don't worry about blue jays.
But this message, this idea that climate change is happening right here in our backyards, and you can actually see the effect. You can see birds responding to the warming temperatures. It's an important part of our outreach because if we think of climate change as just something that's happening in the Arctic or a very detached phenomenon, people aren't going to feel the urgency to take action. And I think it's important to explain to people that it's actually right here where we live, and it's happening now.
And it's not getting colder, it's getting warmer?
The trends are, yes. And it's very easy to come out of a winter like we just had and say, whew, that was cold, I guess we're going to be okay. But in fact, January, for example, I think was the 4th warmest January on record globally. So we look at our personal experience here in Plymouth and we think it was cold, but if you look at the global trend, in fact, it was a very warm month.
They're saying that we're going to have a scorcher of a spring and summer.
Who knows? But we wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
You sort of put your finger on it earlier, Karen, when you said there have been variations. And this is why we're so excited and lucky to have 45 plus years of migration data.
Yes.
So in some years, everything will come out earlier. Gardeners know this. Look at the vegetation. The birds are responding to the vegetation. So they come up when the little green leaves are coming out. The caterpillars are coming on the green leaves. And very shortly after that, the early birds will get the caterpillar, as it were. And
life cycle.
So that cycle will happen, and that might be earlier some years, and it might be later in other years. But the advantage of having 40 plus years data is that we are seeing a very steady trend of warmer climates earlier arrivals in spring for many of the bird species, and in some cases later departures in fall, so they're expanding their summer a bit.
You were ahead of the curve.
I hope so. Well, we didn't know we were going to study the curve, as Dave said, but we've been collecting very standardized data in spring and fall.
The world probably contacts you, other areas of the world, and asks for your data, what you think, right?
All bird banding goes to the Fish and Wildlife Service in Washington, D.C., so all the data are there and everyone has access to that. I think the thing that Manomet Bird Observatory, as used to be, and 3 or 4 other bird observatories I can think of, one in Point Reyes, California, one in Long Point in Ontario in Canada, and the last one is at the Carnegie Institute's field station in Powder Mill, Pennsylvania. And I think all of these organizations, including Manomet, have these long-term data, luckily in different parts of North America. And so by combining the trends that we are all seeing, we're very comfortable that it's not just happening in Manomet, it's happening everywhere over the whole area.
All right, let's take on that first photo. Let's see what we have there.
That is our iconic bird. This is the gray catbird.
By far the most captured bird at Manomet, the most studied bird.
Yes.
Everyone has catbirds. This is the bird that says "meow" in the background, and they love the shrubby, scrubby sort of habitat. And this is one of the species that is showing very clear adaptation to the warmer climate. So catbirds are coming back days earlier now than they were 40 years ago. Catbirds also breed here, which is sort of fun, and then we get another big flush of catbirds in the fall. So gray catbird is our most banded bird, and if you come to Manomet, it's the most likely bird that you would see if you turned up.
And is the nest under leaves?
Nest is in a shrub. It's usually about head height or a little bit higher, but they're very clever at putting it into catbrier or something that we can't get into. And they will have up to 1 or 2 broods per year, so they may be able to produce a lot of young.
I've got 100 of them.
Yes. They winter, interestingly, in southern United States and right down into Central America. So when we're working with students in Belize and Central America in the winter, we see catbirds.
Yeah. It's familiar to them.
Catbirds are quite long-distance migrants.
Next one, honey. Oh, there's a bird.
So this is an example of the education and the outreach programs that we were talking about. 2 of our banders, Alan Neidel on the left and Patrick Roberts, who's taking the bird out of the net. And we take students around, sometimes to the lab, sometimes around actually to see the netting operations, and show them the birds in the hand. And it's an important experience for children to be able to see the birds up close. And
the net is very, very fine. Most people say, I can't see the net. And actually,
what is it made out of?
That's the whole point. They're made of very fine nylon. And I always liken it to a bird is flying along through the habitat fairly low. Our nets are about 7 feet high and 40 feet long. We have 50 of them scattered around the property. So the chances of a bird flying into a net are quite good. And I liken it to a safety net under your tightrope. If you fall off your tightrope in the circus, you fall into a net. The net gives with you, and then the bird drops into a pocket. So from dawn to dusk, our staff on weekdays go around and take the birds out of the nets every 20 minutes or so.
Genius.
Bring them back to the lab. We mark each bird with an individual band so that we know who it is. They have a number, which comes from the feds, like a social security number. And so we know the number of individuals, and that's really the basis of our population work that we've talked about up to this point.
How interesting. Next one, honey.
Everyone says, what does a bird band look like? There's a bird band. If you went down to Jenny Pond, or if you're in the middle of Plymouth, or if you were on Bartlett Pond in Whitehorse Beach, every now and again somebody says, oh, a swan has come down on Route 3 in the middle of town on a wet and windy night. Could you come and do something about it? So we all run out and catch a swan. These are swan bands. They're very large, but they would fit around a swan's leg. And each band has a number, and it also says Avise, Fish and Wildlife, Washington, D.C. And the number is unique, so that we might put a band on the swan before we could put him back in the pond, just to keep track on him and see how long he lives.
Excellent.
We can find out how long do they live. We can find out how many individuals. Swans can live up to 10, 15 years. I think there are 20-year-old swans. They're long-lived. Whereas our friend the catbird probably lives 2 or 3 years if he's lucky. So it depends.
Now, do the swans mate for life?
Swans do, and the particular swans we have in Plymouth were actually imported from Europe, which I guess I can't complain about, right? And they are non-migrant, so they stay here. If we get very, very cold winters like this, they may go out into Plymouth Bay. You may see swans off Manomet in the sea, right? But then they'll come right back to their pond afterwards, won't they? So yes, they form very long pair bonds. On the other hand, if one disappears, then magically another swan appears, and everyone carries on very rapidly. So
Oh, fickle.
fickle.
All right. Next.
This is actually one of our visitors, and Keith here is holding a broad-winged hawk, which is a fascinating bird. It migrates all the way from right down into Central America and into Northern South America, comes all the way up our coast and actually breeds in Plymouth. And we'll see them. It's a smaller than a red-tailed hawk. It has a call, very distinctive, right? And occasionally we can catch birds about that big in our nets. So this bird has been banded in the lab. That's our deck where everyone sits around and watches. And broad-winged hawk is about to be launched back into the environment. So he's probably takes about maybe 2 or 3 minutes to band a bird, do the weights, do the measurements, check the age, check the sex, check for parasites, do all the things we do. And then, of course, we want to release them back into the environment, let them carry on doing what they're doing so that we can assume we're looking to.
I've seen them in the yard, and the first one I ever saw was on the ground, and I thought he was dancing. And
I know what he was doing, yes.
I looked closer, and he had a bird.
Yes, he was not dancing alone, I'm afraid.
It was awful. I screamed. But, you know.
Well, that's what he does. So that's, you do what you do, and that's what he does.
I go to Stop and Shop.
Well, he doesn't have a credit card, Karen, so he's got to do it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. The next one.
The next one is a great picture. This is a bird called a yellow-breasted chat, but this is what Dave was talking about. We have the opportunity to have students down. These students actually came down from Dedham, I believe, Noble students. And Debbie Harrison is one of our supporters and
counselor.
One of the counselors of Manomet, exactly, and she is a fantastic biology teacher at Noble School. So she brings her students down, and we get to talk about birds and show birds, and then this is the exciting part. You get to hold your hand out, and somebody puts a bird in your hand, and it flies away, and that is just sort of the magic part, even to me, although I've probably handled hundreds of thousands of birds at this point. But
I had that experience when I stared working at Manomet 4
did,
years ago,
Yes.
and Trevor walked up and put, it wasn't a chat, I think it was a yellow-rumped warbler in my hand, and that experience of holding the bird, letting it go, was it's a connection that it can't be replicated.
There's life.
So we talk about the science and we talk about the data, but we never lose track of the fact that we're dealing with exciting birds with spectacular colors. And we always feel very privileged to be able to handle birds and see them up close and take photographs and share them with people like the auditors today.
And what was that bird again?
That bird was a yellow-breasted chat, which is a warbler that breeds in the southern part of the United States and just up this far, not quite in Massachusetts. So again, another southern species advancing northwards as the climate warms, and winters in Central America. So again, when we've taken university students down to Belize, we'll find yellow-breasted chats in scrubby areas in Belize, for example.
Lovely. Next one. I don't think I've ever seen one of those up close.
These, we promise, are the only two boring graphs, do we? Well, Dave, do you want to handle the boring graphs?
Yes.
I will just say that before Trevor tackles the details of this graph, that this is the value in the fact that we've been doing this work since 1969.
Exactly.
To be able to look at these numbers over that time span, again, you see the variation year to year, but the trend line is unmistakable, and that's important.
So this is data for each year. Each of those red bars is 1 year from 1970 up through, I think, 2013. I think it's up to date.
It is.
And this is spring migration. And so what we saw back in the 70s were some pretty high peaks and then some valleys, up and down, you know, years when the wind blew more from the west and years when it didn't, warmer years when birds arrived a little bit earlier. But this is just the sheer number of birds. And I think everyone can see that the big trend from 1970 through about 1990 or so was that we had a long, slow, steady decline. And unfortunately, that was true of pretty much all songbirds in North America. Unfortunately, that's not just Manomet. And then populations leveled off a little bit. So the end of the graph actually goes along pretty steadily. If we can get to the next graph, whenever we can put that up. The first thing a good, careful scientist does is they say, all right, that happened in spring, but what about fall? And in fall, we found very, very similar patterns, and this has been supported also by breeding bird surveys on the national level. So again, more birds in the fall. You'll notice some of the peaks are a little bit higher there. That's because everyone had babies, and so we're getting a lot of juveniles coming back. And birds, again, dropping down from the 70s up to the 90s, but then pretty much stable ever since. So the good news, I guess, is that we are doing something right in conservation. We are perhaps preserving habitat. Perhaps the message is getting down to Central and South America in some cases. We are preserving habitat in our own little backyards. More people are planting native trees and shrubs in their backyards.
Yes.
And
that's important.
So I think it acts on all scales, from federal refuges and international shorebird refuge
and
work.
we're not using poisons on our lawns.
That would be a very wonderful thing.
Yes.
And of course we did in the 1950s and the 60s, and we didn't know exactly.
Did not know.
Now we do, so now we have the option of using something that does not affect the wildlife.
The bees, I mean, my goodness.
Terrible. Bees, butterflies, you name it.
Yeah, but you have hope that it is coming.
Well, it's very nice when your graph that is declining rapidly levels off. And it's been leveling off for nearly 20 years now.
Okay.
So at least on broad scale, populations are stable. The next question is, what about timing? Are birds arriving back earlier? Are birds arriving back later? And we also found that just because we have these 40 years of data, we were able, with colleagues from Boston University particularly, Professor Premack has been working up at Walden Pond and studying some of the data going back to the 1800s, and he and his students have worked with us, and we found that birds are indeed, in many cases, arriving back earlier as the climate warms. So they're very sensitive indicators of the leaf out is earlier, the insects are coming out earlier, and the birds are coming back as early as they can, and in some cases coming back earlier in the spring.
That's good.
And fascinating, I think the same researchers up at Boston University, separate from the work we do with them, studied Thoreau's writings from Walden Pond. And based on his writings, they were able to compare when leaf out was happening when he was writing as compared to now. And it's dramatically earlier now.
So Dr. Premack has some graduate students studying the same species of plants at Walden that were there in the mid-1800s. Right. Many of them have disappeared, which of course is part of life, but those are up to 2-3 weeks earlier, which is amazing.
Yes.
So again, an unmistakable sign of warming temperatures having an impact in our own backyards.
When I first moved here, we had mayflower all over our yard.
Yes.
And we don't get that anymore, you know, and it's very upsetting.
We're working on some wildlands trust property down in Bourne, a friend of ours, and we're taking volunteer students from the Rising Tide Charter School, which is not very far from this studio, and Jeff Griffiths, one of their very good teachers, brings his students down, and we have actually had the students out there measuring the leaf out of Canada mayflower and the time that the leaves expand, and measuring the growth of the leaves of blueberries down there, and taking vegetation parameters and doing all the usual things about percentage cover and DBHs and heights and all that sort of good stuff, but actually getting students out into the field and showing with data that springs are arriving back earlier. So you can do it right here. It doesn't have to be the Arctic, and it doesn't have to be Central America.
Trevor's leading another program at Manomet directly related to that work with Wildlands Trust and Rising Tide called the Climate Lab, and it's a program we're really excited about. Right now we're working with 3 school districts, I believe, Sandwich, Duxbury, and Wareham.
Excellent.
And we're working with the science teachers from those school districts, and they're bringing these methods back to their own schools so they can create a similar experience on school grounds or near school grounds for their students. And
so isn't it great that you can get a student out into the woods again and doing all the things that probably we all did when we were young. Yes.
And you're growing scientists.
I hope so.
And biologists.
Growing scientists, but also even if they had a different direction professionally, they have an appreciation for the changes that are happening.
And the changes
and
that
we're
are
growing
happening.
voters for 10 or 20 years down the line, so it makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Children love it too, of course.
Of course they do. Nature. We did.
And you got out of the classroom and you got to go and measure trees and do fun things. This is a fun project.
Next one. Oh, I love that bird.
Dave, what is this?
So
We're laughing.
Yeah, early on in my time at Manomet, I misidentified a female cardinal, and I have not yet heard the end of it.
Never lived it down.
No, 4 years later, I'm reminded on a daily basis.
Everyone else in the audience, of course, knows
Yes.
that males are nice and red, and females are sort of buffy-colored and don't
Yes.
particularly look like the male except in shape.
Right.
You know that.
It's very intimidating to work in an organization with a lot of ornithologists.
Terrible.
Yes.
Well, you know, the female birds are usually duller in color because they
That's a
have
good
the
reason.
eggs.
Exactly.
They sit on the, you know, although there are some males that do that,
Mm-hmm.
but they're to be camouflaged.
And you don't want your broad-winged hawk to find the female
No.
sitting on the nest, so
No.
she has the camouflage color.
Yes.
Exactly.
But this
Exactly.
is a beautiful.
This is a beautiful male.
And red is such an odd color to have
Right.
for a bird.
Right. Very.
But we like to put the cardinal up there because, as Trevor said, it's a bird that just wasn't here a few decades ago, and now it's so
South.
prevalent that it's just taken for granted.
Bird watchers would go down to Cape Cod and get very excited in the 1920s because cardinals were just arriving from the south. They were in Long Island and New York, and then a few turned up on Cape Cod. And bird watchers of that era would go rushing down to Cape Cod to see a mockingbird or a cardinal, or if they were lucky, a tufted titmouse. And these were
I
all
have
southern
all of them.
species that, of
Yeah.
course, we all have them now in our
Yeah.
yards. So these species have been moving northwards.
Love it. Next one, honey. Oh, he likes that one too.
And this is our
There
friend,
he is.
there's your friend, the red-bellied woodpecker.
Yep.
This is one of the most terrible names in ornithology as far as New Englanders are concerned. There is, further south and further west, there's a woodpecker with an all-red head, which has preempted the name red-headed woodpecker. But as far as we're concerned, he looks red-headed.
He does.
He does. He does have a
Yes.
little red on his belly, which I challenge you to see at any time, even in the hand.
I do see it.
Tiny little tinge
Yes.
down there. But this is a bird that has only come into Massachusetts. Our friends at Massachusetts Audubon Society did an atlas in the 1970s and have just completed another atlas. And of course, all of us birdwatching fraternity go out and help and cover, trying to find which birds are where. And between those two atlases, breeding bird atlases, this bird, which is not migratory, the red-bellied woodpecker, has become abundant throughout the state and is present in almost every town, I think, except some of the western towns.
And he's got a missus, and I usually get 4 of them.
Well, very good.
And what is that bird? Yellow-bellied sapsucker? It
Yellow-bellied
walks on
sapsucker.
the ground.
That is a yellow-shafted flicker.
A flicker.
Flicker.
That's what it is.
And they're eating ants. They've got long,
Yes.
sticky tongues, and they'll eat ants, and they'll eat your Japanese beetle grubs, which is
Yes.
wonderful, and they'll eat your cutworms in the lawn.
And he jumps up on the fountain there,
Yes.
and he likes water.
And you see that yellow flash in the wings and the big
Yes.
white rump if you're lucky.
Yes.
Yes, he's a funny woodpecker. He feeds on the ground a lot. So
Yeah.
if we have flickers, flickers are good.
I do have them.
Flickers are great for the garden.
Next one, hon. Let's see. Oh. Some people, are afraid of blue jays. I'm not, because he alerts when the
He is.
hawk is around.
He's the warden, isn't he? He says
Yes.
there's a cat coming.
Yes,
Or
or
he
a
says there's a
cat.
hawk coming in over.
Yes.
Yes.
And he's very good. I love him.
I have a blue jay who is pretty good at doing the alarm call.
Yeah.
And I swear that I have seen him fly up into the tree, look at the feeder, see all the birds on the feeder. He gives the alarm call,
Yeah.
everyone flies, and then he comes down and feeds.
Before we jump in, I just want to
Yeah.
give credit for this photography.
Oh, good point.
Please.
Yes, so it's I can't go photo by photo and tell you, but some of them are from Bob Mulvihill, who is the ornithologist at the National Aviary in Pittsburgh, and he
okay.
spent part of last year up here visiting us and took some amazing pictures that we've continued to use. Shiloh Schulte, one of our biologists, took some of those pictures. Haley Jordan, who works at Manomet in the communications department, took some of those pictures. Patrick Roberts, one of our banders. So a lot of great photographers who
They
do a
did.
lot
They
of great
took
work.
some excellent photos.
Some of the very good ones come from someone who actually comes from Manomet, Ian Davies.
Ian Davies. Actually, I can't believe I didn't say Ian Davies. Yes, and he was a
Yeah.
guest on your program last year.
Yes.
Oh, you had Ian?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Ian was here talking about the Arctic work, and
That's right.
he does a lot of great
He
work for
is
us.
phenomenal
Yes.
Yes.
photographer.
His photography is amazing. He took some of these as well, and we're
Yeah.
very lucky to have him around to
Yeah.
We're actually using his photography in the Arctic because he can, with a long
Yes.
lens, creep up and actually get shots of birds with little tiny tags on their leg and read those.
Man. Fascinating man.
He just graduated from college, and he's already in the Arctic studying shorebirds.
Where
He's
is he
working
now?
Right now he's in Europe.
He's in Europe.
Yeah,
Watching birds.
Watching birds.
Of course.
Of course.
Taking pictures of birds. Yeah, that's what he does.
Amy Davis, his mother, runs the Digital Camera Club in Plymouth.
right.
So Amy and the club members, I think, are over there, and Ian has gone with them.
It's a very artistic family, very talented family.
Yep.
But we're very lucky to have Ian working with us on
Yeah.
a number of different projects, and he produces some amazing photography.
I have his book.
And he's going to be running our banding program in the fall. So we just signed Ian up as our senior biologist for that. So that'll be fun.
Don't let him go.
We try not to.
No. Next one. Let's see. Do you have it?
So the point of some of these birds, anyone know what this bird is? This is
I've seen it, but I don't know.
he goes, and then, so he's called a towhee, and he's got a rufous side on there. So
Oh,
he's a
he does.
rufous-sided towhee.
A rufous-sided towhee.
These birds winter in the southern part of the United States and are just coming back now. So anyone who's got a bird feeder in the garden, look out for towhees. They just arrived back at Manomet 3 days ago, I think.
You see his beak, it's curved down.
He's a sparrow. He is a
Yes.
sparrow, even though he's called a funny name. And the old-fashioned New England name for him was chewink. So in the good old
Chewink.
days, they'd say the chewinks are back.
The
back in the
chewinks are
1920s.
back.
Yes. They have a
Wow.
bright red eye. And both the blue jay that we showed before and the towhee, and actually I think one other bird we're going to show next, are all examples of birds that are coming back statistically significantly, boring though that sounds, earlier in the spring
not.
over the 40 years that we've been
Yeah.
looking at. So these are the key species.
Before we continue, so I'm going to have to ask you a question. I have a bird in the yard, and I think it's a wren.
Okay.
Sings beautifully.
Does he go tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then at the end of the season, he sometimes drops one of the syllables and goes.
He's just beautiful.
Yes.
He sings and he
Yes.
comes really close
Yes.
to me, and he
Yes.
goes, and he sits there and he looks at me out of
Yes.
the corner of his
Yes.
eye, and he just sings beautifully.
And if you had mealworms, he'd probably come and sit on your
I'll
hand.
get
Yes, he is. He's an insect eater, like many wrens.
Mealyworms.
And Carolina wren, which I think is the bird you've got, a nice big wren with a white stripe over his eye,
Yeah.
creamy white stripe. They're very loud, and you hear them making this tea kettle call in the yards around now. Again, not too common back in the old days, but much
Yeah.
more common nowadays as they come up from the south. And he's a permanent resident, so he should be here all winter and all summer.
And I think he goes in the leaves.
I wouldn't be surprised if he nested in your potting shed or in any structures you have around. I've seen them nesting in the glove compartment of an old car in a junkyard.
Oh, that's terrific.
They are very good at finding little cavities and
That's
nesting there,
terrific.
and they seem to positively enjoy people, which is
Yeah,
always attractive to us.
They do. They
Yeah,
really
yeah,
do.
yeah.
The next one. Oh, yes.
This is the yellow-rumped warbler. You can see a little bit of yellow on his rump, maybe,
Yeah.
and certainly a flash of yellow under his wing. And this is a species that winters in the southern part of North America, and then will be coming back in about the first week of May. In fact, the very earliest ones could be coming back, maybe even in the last week of April now as it gets warmer. And so we always lead bird trips to Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, which is a great
yes.
place. And round about the second or third week of May, up there is a great time to see the yellow-rump warblers. They're the earliest warblers, and they come through very early in the spring, as soon as the leaf out comes. So can't wait for the yellow-rump warblers.
Next one, dear. Let's see. Oh, there we go.
Now we're going to, we found that which birds are coming back earlier, which birds are responding to climate change, and that seemed to make sense. And we found that the birds that we've looked at so far, which winter within North America or in this part of the world, or don't move very far at all, like your blue jay and the Carolina wren and the cardinal, were certainly responding to climate change by coming back earlier in the spring. We also found that birds that winter in Central America and the Caribbean, like this very nice female black and white warbler, can also pick up on a warmer spring. even down in the Caribbean. So there's apparently enough correlation between a warmer spring in the Caribbean or in northern Central America and a warmer spring all the way up here. And so again, we found that some of these birds were coming back earlier, and the black and white warbler is one example.
I don't know if I have that one.
It looks a bit like a little woodpecker or a little bit like a nuthatch in that it climbs up the trunk.
Yes.
And you can see the camouflage there would fit in very nicely for tree bark.
Yes.
And so it's a warbler that forages on tree trunks and on
Okay.
bark and on major limbs.
I'll
yes.
take a closer look next time. Okay, next one, dear. Oh, what is that?
Talk about gorgeous.
One of my favorites. One of my favorites.
This is the magnolia warbler. Isn't it beautiful? And magnolia warblers are a middle spring migrant. They are not coming back yet, but again, we would find them routinely in rainforest habitat in Central America.
Oh, no wonder I don't see it.
They'll come through here. We'll see them if we're lucky, and then they're off
Yeah.
into the North Woods. So
Last
this
year we
is-
caught a significant number of them.
We did. We had a large number of them. And again,
Really?
magnolia warbler is another bird that shows a much earlier arrival in spring as they come through. So we're finding it on fairly long distance migrants that come from way down south, and we're also finding it in birds that winter in North America.
He's beautiful.
Trevor, if I could just build from that
Yes.
point that you just made.
Please.
We haven't talked about the book yet, but
Yeah.
Trevor and I wrote a book about the impact of climate change on birds, and it was twofold. One was about the way it's going to impact habitat that birds rely on, and the other factor was the way that it's going to impact the birds that are returning.
Right.
And Trevor was just saying there are birds that can pick up on a warmer spring and respond by returning earlier, but there are also birds that winter in South America and don't pick up on that cue.
If you are in a rainforest in the Amazon, how do you know it's a warmer spring in
Yeah,
Georgia,
how do you
or how do you know
know?
it's a warm? And the answer is you don't.
Right. And so they're not coming back responding. And the concern is that there is earlier leaf out, and with that, earlier availability of food resource, and they're not returning in time to take advantage of that.
Oh,
So they miss the peak.
they missed the peak.
It's one of the problems.
Let's talk about this for a minute here.
There you go.
Karen, we'd love you to have that, so
Thank
hang
you,
on to it
dear.
and yes,
Thank
play
you.
with it.
Tell us, it's called Final Flight by Trevor Lloyd-Evans and David McGlinchey. I
So-
don't know if you can get this, Stephen. That's good?
So as I mentioned earlier, one of our goals is to make climate change real, to help people understand how it's happening in our backyards, not just
Yeah.
in distant places. And for birders, there's a real value in being able to go to some of these special places and see the birds that they care about, or see birds that are rarities.
Yeah.
And so Trevor came up with a list of 10 really notable spots that are going to fundamentally be different, as whether it be because the habitat will be changing or because the availability of birds will be different.
And we have a number of them right here.
Yes.
I think the furthest north is in Newfoundland, and the furthest south ones are right down here on Cape Cod in Massachusetts.
Miles Standish is on the list.
Standish.
Miles Standish right behind us, exactly. Yeah.
My goodness.
And Manomet on Cape Cod,
Manomet.
obviously it's very susceptible to sea level rise, so that's going to be a
Yes.
We haven't really talked about anything other than the difference in leaf out from climate change, but of course there are major differences, right,
yes.
Dave?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of sites in the book where they're coastal and sea level rise will have a major impact.
Yes, a
Plum Island,
major,
Plum Island further north is an example.
They were saying a lot of these little islands in Belize, too, is
Yes.
in great danger.
Yes. Some of our colleagues who work in Vermont, right up on the top of Mount Mansfield, which I see you're holding right now.
Yeah.
And one of the species up there, the bignell's thrush, breeds right up in the very highest part of the spruce on the top of Mount Mansfield.
Oh,
As climate
look at
changes,
this bird.
isn't that spectacular? That's
Look
a
at-
scarlet tanager, and that's a really
Can
nice
you
scarlet
see that,
tanager.
Stephen? No?
Come a little more closer to, there you go.
There
Wow.
you go. Look
Yeah.
at that bird.
And that is, since we were talking about Ian earlier, that's an Ian Davies
That's an Ian
photograph.
Davis picture, yes.
Oh, she captured it beautifully.
So the problem is that all the habitats are slowly moving northwards, or in the case of the mountains, moving upwards. And so the species that are found only on the tops of a few mountains in New England now, as the climate changes and as the vegetation changes, will be pushed out. And either they can go further north, or perhaps they can't. And these are some of the species that we're very concerned about.
I used to have holly in the yard until one day, and no exaggeration, maybe 100 robins swept down, stripped
Yes.
the bushes, and they never came back. They never ever
Never buried again?
Never buried
Oh, that's terrible.
again.
That's terrible.
And I said, oh, okay, what else can I plant for the birds? I mean, there's many. Oh, we have a phone call. Hello, you're on Talk of the Town.
Hi, Karen, it's Charlie, and the guest you have. I've been watching the show, and the birds are great.
Thank you, hon.
But I do have some disagreements with the gentleman, because they keep going on about climate change, which, of course, it would be their priority. But I'll give them some facts. They can dispute them. Since the start of satellite measurements in 1979, they actually show minor fluctuations and an insignificant net change in global temperature. Okay? And a lot of people keep going on about carbon dioxide from humans, but actually the greenhouse effect is due to water vapor. It's more due to that.
What do you think, boys? Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you very much.
I've got more if you want.
I'm sure,
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you for that call.
Okay.
And there is obviously politically and culturally a lot of discussion about climate change, but scientifically there's no real debate. There's virtual unanimity in the scientific community that climate change is happening and it's man-made.
All right, for Charlie's sake, I will say, what about those scientists that disagree?
There are very few.
Okay.
And they're not climate scientists by and large. And I mean, to get 100% agreement would be difficult.
Oh, no, I wouldn't expect so.
But the overwhelming number of scientists and climate scientists agree. Last Sunday, the IPCC, the UN body that studies climate change, came out with its most recent report. And it said that there's almost no chance that it's not man-made.
Well, I'll say this. I just think it's a natural course of things. We haven't been around long enough to have tested the Ice Age. What happens after the Ice Age? It warmed up. I mean, these things happen. It's a natural course of things. Things do not stay stagnant.
I think the thing we'd like to show from our data and sort of tell the audience about is that we are looking at very subtle changes, and the nice thing about our birds are that they are indicators. Birds are very, very sensitive. If they don't like something, they can fly away, they can move. This is why we use birds like the bald eagle and the brown pelican and the peregrine falcon as very sensitive indicators of some of the persistent chemicals. And there was a lot of discussion back in the Rachel Carson Silent Spring era about, do we really have harmful chemicals in the environment or don't we? And it's very similar to the sort of discussion I think many of us are having now. We don't know all the answers, but what we do know is that we're seeing changes in our bird populations that are statistically correlated with
That's your job to map, and you have seen
That's our
the
job.
changes.
And we think it's the very rapid change. We think it's the rapid change over the last 40 years.
Because you're absolutely right. I mean, there has been cyclical climate change going back through the Earth's history. But it's the speed that we're adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, which is far beyond anything that you see. And we've been measuring carbon dioxide. We can see levels going back a significant amount of time.
So do you think it's the human and animal breathing?
I think it's almost entirely our man-made lifestyle. It's the way we generate electricity. It's coal-fueled plants to generate electricity. It's the cars we drive.
Okay.
I've been down to rainforest in Central America and South America, and there is less and less rainforest every year. And those huge areas of trees in tropical forests are the things that are providing the oxygen and sucking up the CO2. And as we cut those, it's certainly debatable, and probably we should stick to what we know about, which is what we see with the birds.
We have another phone call. Hello, you're on Talk of the Town.
Oh, I couldn't resist the call in when they started talking about climate change.
Yeah, okay.
So this is kind of a softball because I actually agree that there's probably something going on, but I really have to ask you, didn't it snow last night?
Yeah.
It was as upsetting for us as it was for you. There's no reason for it to be snowing on April 16th.
I mean, you kidding me? It's the hottest winter. I mean, you've got Bill Galvin out telling the power companies not to shut people's power off if they haven't paid.
Absolutely.
You've had the worst winter ever, and people are talking about, there's all this climate
Yeah, our
change.
timing is terrible, isn't it? Yes, yes.
I'm just one of those guys that always has to take both sides of the argument.
Yeah, and you do good, David. You know what? But they're not saying global warming or global cooling. What they're saying is there is some climate change going on. I think that part is indisputable. There's climate change. I don't know if it's warmer or colder, but something's happening.
On average over
What
the
do you
years.
think, David?
Well, they say it's getting warmer, but I hope it gets colder because I like to ski.
I know you do. Well, David here.
I also like to ski. Unfortunately, I crashed a couple months ago, so
He's
I'm
on
missing out on this good
crutches.
winter. Yes.
Yeah, that's no fun. You're right.
But just to your point about the snow last night, and I think Trevor's right, we should stick to the indicators that we study most closely.
Yeah.
But what is said very often is that you can't look at any individual event or individual season and extrapolate. So you can't say it snowed last night, so it's not happening. It's also important not to say, well, this was a particularly hot summer, and therefore that means, you have to look at the trend lines over decades instead of looking
Something
at.
is happening.
Yeah, I agree. I'm watching you guys.
I love you, David.
And I think, just to bring it back to the birds.
Thank you. No, you're not. I love you.
That was a great call, and we appreciate it.
Talk about something you know about.
But to Trevor's point,
Thank you, David.
thank you, David. Karen, to Trevor's
Well,
point,
wait a minute. You know who that was? David Gallerani,
Oh, that's right.
Cape Auto,
Okay.
Cape Auto Service.
Thank you, Mr. Gallerani.
to Trevor's point, the birds are
Yeah.
responding to something.
Yeah, something.
Yeah.
And it's uniform. It's not
Yeah.
one bird doing one thing and one bird doing another. We're
Right.
finding that all of the birds from Central America and from the southern US are arriving back earlier. And interestingly, I don't know whether we'll get into some of the other pictures, but some of
Yeah.
the later pictures we're showing are birds that go right down to South America. And they are not picking up on the change, and they are arriving back at exactly the same time. So, it fits in very nicely. There's also a difference between weather and climate, so we should keep those two clear. Right.
Oh, yes, there is a difference between weather and climate.
Talking short-term or long-term,
Yeah.
obviously.
Stephen, quick question, because I want to get to some
Quick
of
question. There
these.
seems to be a lot more owls up in Logan Airport.
Yes.
And,
My goodness, yes.
I
Absolutely.
noticed they've been capturing and setting them free in other areas. Is there,
Yeah.
is there any reason for them,
Wow.
the abundance of the owls?
Yes, there is. They live way up in the high Arctic, Stephen.
So we're talking about snowy owls.
Snowy owls, particularly, they're the ones in the
snowy
airport.
owls.
The reason that they are capturing on the airport is that obviously they don't want owls sucked into engines as people take off in jet
Yes.
planes. But what has happened apparently last summer was that it was a tremendous year for food in the Arctic, lots of lemmings, lots of food for all the snowy owls. Everyone raised large families.
Good,
Large numbers of baby snowy owls appeared everywhere.
good.
And then the population of lemmings in the Arctic and other food crashed. And so they came much further south than usual. So normally snowy owls would come down into Canada, and Canadians would say, snowy owls again. But we're very excited about snowy owls coming right down here. And I believe there were some as far south as Georgia or something
Florida.
like that. Florida,
Yes.
all the way
Yeah,
south.
Dan Raposa,
Yeah.
a very
Yes.
accomplished photographer. I
Yeah.
don't know if you know him. Took some beautiful pictures of snowy owls on Long Beach.
Wonderful, yes.
So I
yes.
saw those last week. Let's get to a few because we only have 5 minutes. The next one, what is that?
That is a wonderful bird called an ovenbird, and he's called an ovenbird because he makes a little mud nest right on the ground, or a little leaf nest actually right on the ground,
Okay.
and has a side entrance. And this is another of our Central American friends. So
Okay.
he is actually showing pretty good correlation with that.
Very good.
this
What is that?
Used to be common in this part of the world, Karen. This is the wood thrush. It has a beautiful
The wood
ole ole song.
thrush. Yes,
That sort of song.
you do that good.
Not very. Totally unmusical. I apologize to everybody. But
You promised you wouldn't do bird
I
calls.
promised I wouldn't do bird calls. But this is the wood thrush, and this is, again, one of our Central American wintering friends
He's
who comes
not
back at this
here
time of year.
anymore.
Not as many. Big
Okay.
declines, but they are coming back earlier, and they,
Good.
again, are another species
Next
that's
one,
responding. This is a South American friend. He's called a black pole warbler. Pole in the sense of the top of your head, the pole,
Okay.
as in poll tax and all of those things, right?
Yeah.
And these are the species that are not showing any change over the years. So we're very sort of encouraged to see that some birds are reacting because they can detect the warmer springs. And the colder springs, they come back a little later. I mean, they certainly are very adaptable. But this bird winters in Amazonia, in the southern part of Venezuela, and down into the Brazilian rainforest.
My goodness. Oh,
And this is
look
a
at that
mourning warbler,
face.
beautiful bird that breeds right up in Canada.
Yeah.
Passes through here very rapidly. We'd be lucky to see them, but maybe we will.
Yeah,
And
beautiful color.
this is another thrush from South America called a veery that is very much a swamp bird.
veery.
Have you heard those? They have that
Yes.
wonderful song that...
Yes.
Okay, we're not doing bird calls. At the other end of the season, I'm surprised somebody hasn't said, "Well, you're talking about spring. What happens in fall?"
Yeah.
And if we do have a longer, warmer summer, it gives the opportunity for birds like the robins in our backyards to have perhaps 2 broods, maybe 3 broods.
I think mine have 3.
Wouldn't be surprised.
Yes.
And maybe 50 years ago they could only squeeze in 2. So they're able to expand the season. They not only arrive back earlier, but they're leaving later.
You know, you're a nonprofit,
Yeah.
and I think Kenny's been putting up your website.
It's manomet.org.
Yes, manomet.org.
Yes.
I thought he was putting it up, do you have fundraisers? What do? You write grants?
We do get grants. We also receive support from individuals who just admire or like the work we do.
We have an active membership.
Active membership. You can become. Anyone can go on the website.
How
and
much is a
become
membership?
$50, I believe. Is that? Yeah, 50. We're going to say 50 and hope that's right.
And that's right on the website?
It's on the website. Very easy to become a member. Encourage everyone to do so.
Manomet.org.
Yep, it's up on the screen now. That's great.
Yep.
Also, if anyone bought the book on Amazon, the proceeds from the book would go to support the education programs at
Yeah.
Manomet.
Yeah.
100% of the proceeds go to support Trevor's education work.
Which is fun, which is
This
terrific.
is wonderful. I love this little book. This will go right on my coffee table.
And the cover bird is a prairie warbler from right up in Miles Standish, right behind us. So that's
They're just so wonderful, and I'm waiting with bated breath for my hummingbirds.
So as soon as this cold spell goes over, if we're followed by a nice warm front up from the south,
Yeah.
that should bring the hummingbirds. So if we're lucky, in the 20s or late 20s of this month, or in the first week of May.
Yes.
And then I think the hummingbirds are coming back. So anyone who has hummingbird feeders,
Okay.
time to get them ready.
We have 1 minute. I want to thank you so much, the both of you. This was wonderful. It went by much too fast.
Always does.
And it was wonderful meeting you, Trevor.
Thank you so much.
And David, you know, both of you and anybody from the center can come on.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Just contact us, and we're happy to put you on.
Well, we love the show, and thank you for having us on.
Anytime, and I sincerely mean that. And I thank David and Charlie for calling in. Thank you very much. Next week, David, guess who's on? Former Selectman Anthony Shenna and Michelle Badger, and they're going to be talking about the Alumni Association for the Plymouth school system, and of which I know nothing of, and so I'm sure they're going to have a lot of great information, and Anthony is part of the Plymouth Education Foundation with Bob